The restraints clicked shut around Thomas's wrists, their cold bite forcing a sharp intake of breath. Above him, the holographic display flickered to life, casting pale blue light across his tense form. He glared at the figures beyond the glass, insected aliens who observed him with clinical detachment. One stood out, a tall figure, its eyes like obsidian, each movement precise, calculated. Dr. Skrell, head of the Xenon 7 lab and chief scientist, stepped closer to the observation window. "Begin the procedure," he said, voice laced with cold curiosity. Thomas's heart raced, thudding in his chest like a war drum. His mind flashed to memories of Earth, green fields, the crisp air, the laughter of his daughter. A world that felt galaxies away now. They had taken him during a routine supply mission. Galactic medics, they called themselves, but Thomas knew better. They weren't here to heal, they were here to dissect. His muscles tensed as he tried to yank free, but the restraints didn't budge. His breath came in shallow gasps. He glanced around the sterile lab, noting the alien technology surrounding him. Machines hummed, their purpose unknown but undoubtedly sinister. Screens pulsed with streams of data, most of it unreadable, except for one word that kept flashing in an alien dialect he had learned during his capture: emotion. "Stay calm," Thomas muttered under his breath. Panic would only make things worse. He'd learned that in the field, surviving countless skirmishes during Earth's last planetary conflict. But this was different. He wasn't facing soldiers or warlords. He was the subject of an experiment, and he had no idea how to fight back. A sharp buzz echoed through the room as a mechanical arm descended, stopping inches from his temple. Tiny prongs extended, hovering over his skin. Thomas clenched his jaw, his muscles coiling like springs. Dr. Skrell's voice filled the room. "You are an intriguing species, human. Capable of such intense emotional responses, rage especially. Our studies suggest your anger unlocks untapped potential in your physiology. Today, we will see if it can be harnessed." Thomas's stomach twisted. He'd heard rumors during his time in captivity, whispers among the guards of humans being experimented on, their emotions extracted and amplified. But no one had ever survived to tell the tale. The prongs pressed against his temple, sending a sharp jolt through his brain. His vision blurred, and the taste of metal filled his mouth. A flood of images burst into his mind: the war on Earth, his squad mates falling, the betrayal of his commander, his family taken away. All the anger he had buried deep started to bubble to the surface. "Focus on the emotion," Dr. Skrell instructed. "Allow it to guide you." Thomas gritted his teeth, fighting against the tide of memories. He knew what they were doing. They wanted to break him, to unlock whatever primal force they believed lurked within. But he wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. "You think you can control this?" he growled through clenched teeth. Skrell's expression didn't change. "Control is not our goal. Understanding is." Thomas's body jerked as another surge of electricity shot through him. His skin prickled, and a sudden heat coursed through his veins. His muscles strained against the restraints, the steel groaning in protest. He could feel the rage clawing its way out, a beast he had locked away long ago, and it scared him. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker as his vision tunneled. He remembered the last time he'd let his anger loose, on a battlefield, surrounded by enemies. The destruction he'd caused. The lives he couldn't save. Sweat dripped down his forehead as his pulse pounded in his ears. The heat intensified, and with it, his control began to slip. He could feel the transformation coming, his body responding to the flood of emotion, the power growing. He shook violently, the restraints now bending under the pressure. Dr. Skrell leaned in, fascinated. "Remarkable. His physiology is adapting far beyond projections. Increase the output." From the corner of his eye, Thomas saw the medics hesitate, their clawed hands tapping nervously on their consoles. They were losing control of the experiment, and they knew it. "Enough!" Thomas roared, his voice reverberating through the room. His muscles bulged, veins straining under his skin. With a final surge of strength, he tore free from the restraints, the metal snapping like twigs. The room fell silent as Thomas stood, panting, his hands shaking with barely contained fury. The air crackled with energy, his body vibrating with the raw power coursing through him. For a moment he stared at Dr. Skrell, his eyes burning with an intensity that made even the alien scientist take a step back. "You wanted to see what happens when a human gets angry?" Thomas growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Now you'll find out." The sound of shattering metal still echoed in Thomas's ears as he stood, breathing heavily, his heart a thunderous beat in his chest. The restraints lay in pieces around him, jagged fragments scattered across the sterile floor of the lab. His hands trembled with the sheer force that had broken free, the adrenaline surge still coursing through his veins like fire. Across the room, Dr. Skrell didn't move. The other medics scurried around, their insected legs clicking nervously on the tile, whispering in rapid bursts of their alien dialect. Skrell, however, merely observed, his obsidian eyes flickering with something resembling fascination. "Fascinating," Skrell murmured, almost to himself. His voice was a quiet hum beneath the rising tension in the room. "I didn't think you'd break through so quickly." Thomas's eyes snapped to Skrell, his breathing ragged but controlled. "You're playing with fire, Doctor," he growled, his voice low, dangerous. His body still pulsed with energy, a strange mixture of rage and clarity. He could feel the raw power inside him, ready to burst at any moment, but he also sensed its unpredictability, a wild, volatile force that could consume him if he wasn't careful. Skrell tilted his head, the alien equivalent of a curious smile crossing his features. "That's the point, human. The fire inside you, it's what we seek. The key to everything." Thomas took a step forward, feeling the crackle of static in the air as he moved. Every muscle in his body tensed, not just with anger but with the raw, unnatural strength he could barely contain. "Key to what?" he demanded. His voice echoed through the lab, causing the other medics to flinch. Skrell met his gaze, unblinking. "Your potential. Your anger, your emotion, it makes you stronger. Faster. More powerful than anything we've encountered. Imagine if we could harness that. Imagine a legion of humans, driven by pure, unfiltered emotion. The galaxy would bend to your will." Thomas's jaw clenched, the taste of bile rising in his throat. He wasn't a weapon, and he wouldn't let them turn him into one. "You think we'd ever let that happen? You think I'd let you control me?" Skrell's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with a calculating intelligence. "Control isn't the goal. But cooperation, perhaps. You're free, Thomas. For now. But your body is still adapting, still changing. How long can you last before you lose control?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time since his capture, Thomas felt true fear. He didn't know how long he could hold on. The power surging through him, it wasn't natural. He could feel it, twisting inside him like a coiled spring ready to snap. The experiment had triggered something deep within him, something primal, and it terrified him. A sharp, mechanical hiss drew his attention to the far corner of the lab. A new door slid open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor leading to the heart of the Xenon 7 facility. Skrell gestured toward it with one thin, clawed hand. "Go, then," Skrell said softly. "You're free to leave. But understand this, your journey is far from over. The anger inside you, it will grow. And when it does, you'll come back. You'll seek answers, and I will be here waiting." Thomas hesitated, his body still vibrating with barely contained energy. His instincts screamed at him to run, to escape while he still could. But something about Skrell's calm confidence unnerved him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the alien knew something he didn't, that there was more to this experiment than just breaking his mind. Before he could respond, the mechanical arm that had injected him earlier sprang back to life, hovering menacingly above his head. Its sharp prongs glinted in the low light, a reminder of the invasive procedure that had started all of this. Without warning, Thomas felt a sharp pain radiate through his skull, like a vice tightening around his brain. He stumbled, gripping his head as his vision blurred. The energy inside him, the anger, flared violently, threatening to tear him apart from the inside out. "Leave now or succumb to it," Skrull warned, his voice cold but unhurried. "You're running out of time." Gritting his teeth against the pain, Thomas staggered toward the open door. Every step was a battle against the wave of fury building inside him, a storm threatening to burst free. His vision swam, his body trembling uncontrollably. He could hear Skrull's voice fading behind him, a calm, haunting whisper. "Your anger will find you, Thomas. It always does." The door slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, plunging him into darkness. Alone in the dim corridor, Thomas leaned against the wall, panting. His body still buzzed with energy, but the overwhelming urge to lash out was slowly fading. He had to stay in control, he had to. But as he looked down at his trembling hands, he realized with a sinking feeling that Skrull might be right. The power wasn't leaving him. If anything, it was growing stronger. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could fight it. The corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by intermittent flickers from overhead panels, casting long, distorted shadows. Thomas forced himself forward, each step heavier than the last as the pain behind his eyes pulsed like a living thing. His vision wavered, the edges darkening as if the world itself was closing in on him. He could still feel the pressure, the rage Skrull had awoken inside him, twisting deeper into his mind. Every breath came with effort now, as if the air itself had become thick, suffocating. Focus, he thought, gritting his teeth. He couldn't let the fury win. Not yet. His hand reached the wall, fingers brushing cold metal as he braced himself. The chill was grounding, something solid amidst the whirlwind inside him. He leaned there for a moment, head bowed, fighting to reclaim even a sliver of control. But the power gnawed at him relentlessly, urging him to let go, to unleash it all. Ahead, a soft mechanical hum broke the stillness. Thomas lifted his gaze and saw a narrow door at the end of the hall, its surface gleaming under the pale lights. The only way out, or deeper in. With no other choice, he pushed off the wall and stumbled forward, every muscle in his body taut with the effort of restraint. As he neared the door, a flicker of movement caught his eye, something low, quick, darting just beyond his peripheral vision. He spun, fists clenched, ready to fight. But the hallway behind him remained empty, still. "Paranoia," he muttered to himself. "Just keep moving." The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a massive chamber bathed in faint blue light. Rows of medical equipment lined the walls, tall glass tubes filled with strange, pulsing liquids, monitors displaying cryptic alien readouts. The air was sterile and cold, tinged with a faint antiseptic smell that burned at the edges of his nostrils. In the center of the room stood a large console, its screen glowing faintly. But it wasn't the machinery that captured Thomas's attention. No, it was the figure waiting beside it, another human. He stopped dead in his tracks, eyes narrowing. She stood tall, her stance deliberate and poised, her face half hidden by the shadows. Her skin was pale, and her dark hair spilled over her shoulders like a cascade of night. But there was something familiar about her, the sharpness of her gaze, the way she held herself, radiating a calm, dangerous energy. "Who the hell are you?" Thomas demanded, his voice hoarse, cracking under the weight of exhaustion. She stepped forward, her movements precise, as if each step was calculated to maintain an air of control. Her lips curved into a small, tight-lipped smile. "Someone who's been through what you're feeling now. But I've learned to control it." "Control what?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. She stopped a few feet from him, her eyes sharp, almost predatory. "The anger. The power they've injected into us. They think they can turn us into weapons, tools for their war. But we're more than that." She paused, tilting her head. "You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the rage building inside, waiting to explode." Thomas clenched his fists at his sides. "Yeah. And I'm fighting it." Her expression darkened, a trace of sympathy flickering across her face. "That's where you're wrong. You can't fight it forever. It's not something you beat. It's something you master. Skrull knows that. He's betting on you losing control, just like they did with the others." Others. The word struck him like a blow to the chest. How many others? He wondered. How many humans had they experimented on? How many had fallen to the anger before they could find a way to master it? What happened to them? Thomas asked, voice tight. She sighed, her gaze dropping for a moment. They weren't strong enough. The anger consumed them, twisted them into something else. They became mindless, dangerous, and Skrell used them as data points. You're the latest experiment in his collection. The strongest yet, but if you don't control what's inside you, if you don't learn fast, you'll end up just like them. A surge of cold dread washed over him. His skin prickled as he thought of those faceless, broken humans, warped by the same force he was trying to contain. But then, buried beneath that fear, something stirred. A flicker of defiance. That's not happening to me, Thomas said, his voice steadying. The woman studied him for a long moment before nodding. Good. But you need to prove it. There's no time left. Skrell's been manipulating you, trying to push you to the breaking point. He's waiting for you to snap. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then let him wait. She smiled, a cold, knowing smile. Follow me. If you want to live, if you want to make it out of here with your mind intact, I'll show you the way. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the far end of the chamber, disappearing into the shadows. Thomas hesitated only for a moment before following her, his heartbeat steadying with resolve. Skrell might have set this trap, but Thomas wasn't about to let it ensnare him. Whatever was coming next, he would be ready. Thomas followed the woman into the darkness of the chamber, the air around them growing colder with each step. His pulse quickened, not just from the chilling atmosphere, but from the weight of what he was about to face. He could feel the raw energy thrumming beneath his skin, begging for release, pushing against the fragile walls of his control. The woman's calm demeanor did nothing to ease his anxiety. She had mastered this power, but Thomas had only glimpsed its edge, and it had nearly torn him apart. She stopped at a reinforced door at the end of the passage, its surface smooth and reflective. This is where it happens, she said softly, placing her palm on the panel beside the door. Beyond here, there's no turning back. Thomas took a deep breath, steadying himself. I've made it this far. I'm not stopping now. The door slid open, revealing a massive chamber. In its center, bathed in a harsh white light, stood Skrell. His thin, insect-like frame was even more unsettling in person, his limbs too long, his movements too precise. Behind him, rows of consoles and monitors tracked every possible data point, glowing with alien symbols. Around the room, tubes filled with pale, floating figures, humans, or what was left of them, cast eerie shadows on the walls. Skrell turned to face them, his multifaceted eyes narrowing in a way that conveyed smug satisfaction. Subject 47, he said, his voice a raspy hiss. You've finally come to the final stage. Thomas clenched his fists, the heat inside him building again. You've been playing with us. Twisting us. I'm not your experiment, Skrell. The alien scientist clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. You are exactly what I designed you to be. A perfect human specimen, stronger, faster, more dangerous than any of your kind. But now, you must face the final test. Will you control your anger, or will it consume you as it did the others? The woman beside Thomas stepped forward, her voice sharp. This is a trap, Thomas. He's been pushing you, waiting for you to break. He wants you to lose control. I know, Thomas muttered, the tension coiling in his chest. But I'm not breaking. Not yet. Skrell raised a long, spindly finger, pointing at the console behind him. It's simple, human. If you can harness your rage, focus it, you can defeat me. But if you fail, you'll end up like them. He gestured to the tubes, where the distorted figures floated, their faces twisted in silent agony. The energy surged again, threatening to overwhelm Thomas's senses. He could feel the pulse of it, a living thing crawling beneath his skin. It wanted out, wanted to destroy, to rip Skrell and everything around him apart. Control it, Thomas told himself. You can do this. Thomas! the woman snapped, her voice cutting through the chaos in his mind. Stay with me. Don't give in. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to focus on her voice, on the steadiness of her presence. Slowly, the storm inside him began to settle, the heat receding just enough for him to think clearly again. I'm not like them, he said, opening his eyes and stepping toward Skrell. I'm not your tool. Skrell's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. You are nothing more than what I created you to be. An enhanced human, a weapon for the war to come. Thomas shook his head. No. I'm still human. And that's more than you'll ever understand. With a sudden roar, the power within him exploded, but not in the way Skrell had hoped. Thomas channeled it, directing the force into his body, amplifying his speed, his strength, but keeping it under control. He leapt toward Skrell, faster than the alien could react, and slammed his fist into the console behind him. The room erupted in sparks, the machinery groaning under the strain of the blow. Skrell shrieked, his form collapsing to the ground as the consoles around him flickered and died. The tubes holding the distorted humans shuddered and cracked, releasing them in a cascade of fluid. Thomas stood over the fallen alien, his breath heavy, his body thrumming with energy. But he didn't strike again. The power had not taken over. He had mastered it. You think you can control us? Thomas said quietly, staring down at Skrell's trembling form. But we're not your slaves. We never were. Behind him, the woman approached, her expression unreadable. You did it. You controlled the rage. Thomas exhaled, the tension draining from his body. Yeah. But this isn't over. Not yet. The room was falling apart around them, the lights dimming as the systems failed. But Thomas felt something different now. For the first time since Skrell had unleashed this experiment, he felt like he was the one in control. Together, they walked out of the chamber, leaving Skrell and his twisted creations behind. There would be more battles ahead, more enemies who underestimated humanity. But now, Thomas knew, there was nothing more dangerous than a human who could harness his own strength.